You wake up freezing. Smoke fills the room. No alarm clock, just a cold. Your whole family sleeps in one room. This was Scandinavia around 950 AD. Most Vikings never raided anyone. They farmed, they fished, they froze. Only 1 in 10 ever went raiding. So what did the other 9 do? Let's start with where they actually lived. Archaeologists excavated Trelleborg, Denmark in the 1930s. They found circular fortresses housing entire communities. One longhouse held up to 30 people, families, servants, animals, all under one roof, literally. Livestock slept indoors during winter. Body heat kept everyone alive through the cold. Bone analysis from Norwegian graves tells us more. Average Viking height: 5 feet 7 inches for men, 5 feet 2 inches for women, taller than medieval Europeans. Their diet explains why. Fish, grain, dairy. Barley bread was eaten at nearly every meal. Skyr, a thick yogurt, was a daily staple. Meat was rare,
mostly reserved for feasts. Now let's talk about actual daily work. Dawn meant chores. No debate about it. Women ran the household economy entirely. They controlled the keys. Literally, the household keys. A key ring symbolized her authority in the home. She managed food stores, servants, and finances. Icelandic sagas describe women running farms alone. Husbands were away trading or raiding for months. Meanwhile, spinning wool was constant, endless work. One Viking sail needed 2 years of spinning. Historians estimate 15 kilometers of thread per sail. Wool wasn't just clothing, it was currency. Cloth was traded like money across Scandinavia. Meanwhile, men worked the fields relentlessly. Scandinavian soil was thin, rocky, and stubborn. Barley and rye were the only reliable crops.
Growing seasons lasted barely 100 days. Every family also fished the fjords daily. Herring and cod were dried for winter storage. Dried fish could last an entire year. Children worked too. There was no childhood off time. By age 7, kids herded goats and sheep. By 12, boys learned to use an axe. Girls learned weaving before their 10th birthday. Play existed too. Vikings loved games. Archaeologists found ice skates carved from animal bone. Board games like Nefertafel were incredibly popular. Even warriors played it during long winter nights. Speaking of winter, it dominated everything. Snow could bury villages for 4 months straight. Food stored in autumn had to last that long. A bad harvest meant real, lethal starvation risk. This is why storage skill mattered more than raiding. Salting, smoking, and fermenting preserved everything possible. Fermented shark, called hakarl, was an Icelandic staple. It was buried underground for months to cure.
Evenings brought the household together around one fire. This was the only warm, lit space in the house. Storytelling filled these hours almost every single night. Tales of gods, giants, and doomed heroes. Odin, Thor, and Ragnarok were common topics. These stories taught children their culture's core values: courage, loyalty, and honor above personal safety. Music also filled these long winter nights. A lyre found in Norway dates to the Viking Age. Songs passed down family and clan history orally. Written language was rare. Runes served ritual purposes. Most Vikings couldn't read or write at all. Rune stones marked graves, treaties, and important events. Now, let's talk about religion in daily life. Norse gods weren't distant. They were personal. Thor's hammer amulets were worn constantly for protection. Archaeologists found thousands of these amulets across Scandinavia. Sacrifices, called blot, marked seasonal festivals. Animals were offered for good harvests and health. These weren't dark rituals. They were community celebrations. Marriage worked differently than most people assume today. Women could own property and request divorce freely. Icelandic law codes confirm this explicitly in writing. This was unusual for medieval Europe at the time. Divorced women kept their dowry and their children. Marriage was often arranged for economic, practical reasons. Love mattered less than land, alliances, and stability. Now, let's talk about health and medicine. Life expectancy averaged around 40 to 50 years. Childbirth was the leading cause of female death. Herbal remedies treated most common illnesses and wounds. Archaeologists found surgical tools in several Viking graves. Skull surgery, called trepanning, actually had survivors. Yes, patients survived having holes drilled in skulls. Hygiene was better than most people assume today. Combs, Tweezers and ear cleaners were common finds. Saturday was even named Washing Day in Old Norse. Let's discuss what happened when someone actually died. Funerals varied by wealth, status, and personal belief. Wealthy Vikings were sometimes buried inside actual ships. The Oseberg ship burial held 2 noble women. It contained textiles, carts, and elaborate carved sledges. Most common Vikings received simpler, humbler burials. Grave goods still mattered. Tools, jewelry, weapons included. They believed these items were needed in the afterlife. Warriors hoped for Valhalla. Farmers expected something different. Now, let's return to an ordinary family's yearly rhythm. Spring meant plowing fields and planting seeds fast. Summer meant fishing, trading, and short raiding trips. Autumn meant harvesting everything before the frost returned. Winter meant survival, storytelling, and waiting for spring. This cycle repeated for generations without much change. No weekends, no vacations, no days truly off. Yet, leisure still existed within this demanding rhythm. Feasts happened during major festivals throughout the year. Mead, meat, and music filled these rare occasions. These feasts strengthened bonds across the entire community. So, what does this actually tell us today? Vikings weren't defined by violence and conquest alone. Most lived quiet lives built on labor and family. Survival demanded skill, patience, and constant physical effort. Women held real power within the household structure. Community and storytelling held society together through darkness. They lived hard lives, but rich, connected ones. Perhaps not so different from ordinary life today. Let's go deeper into the Viking home itself. The longhouse was built from timber, turf, and stone. Walls were often over 1 meter thick. Turf roofs kept heat trapped through brutal winters.
A central hearth ran down the middle of the room. Smoke escaped through a hole cut in the roof. There were no chimneys. Smoke just lingered indoors. Eyes stung constantly. Lungs suffered over decades. Archaeologists found blackened lung tissue in some remains. Chronic respiratory illness was common among older Vikings. Benches lined both walls for sitting and sleeping. Furs and wool blankets provided the only real warmth. Wealthier families had separate rooms for private use. Poorer families shared one single open space entirely. Storage pits beneath the floor kept food cool. Grain, cheese, and dried meat stayed there year-round. Furniture was minimal, just benches, chests, and tables. Wooden chests held clothing, tools, and family valuables. Locks on chests were rare, small luxury items. Light came only from the fire and small windows. Glass didn't exist. Windows were just small holes. Animal bladders or cloth covered them during storms.
Let's talk about food storage and cooking methods now. Iron cooking pots hung directly above the fire. Stews combined grain, vegetables, and whatever meat existed. Onions, cabbage, and peas were common garden crops. Archaeologists found preserved seeds confirming these exact crops. Bread was baked on flat stones near the fire. Honey was the only sweetener, and it was rare. Salt came from boiling seawater along the coast. This process took hours and required constant attention. Salt preserved meat and fish for winter storage. Beer and mead were consumed daily, not just festivals. Water was often unsafe, so beer was safer to drink. Brewing was typically a woman's household responsibility. Now, let's examine clothing in much greater detail. Wool was the primary fabric for nearly all clothing. Linen was used for undergarments closer to the skin. Colors came from natural dyes like madder and woad. Red and blue signaled wealth and higher social status. Poorer Vikings wore undyed, plain brown or gray wool. Brooches fastened cloaks and signified family or clan identity. Oval brooches were specifically worn by married women. Men wore tunics, trousers, and long wool cloaks. Leather belts held tools, pouches, and small knives. Shoes were made from single pieces of soft leather. Archaeologists found hundreds preserved in York and Dublin. Children often went barefoot indoors, even during winter. Now, let's discuss trade and the broader Viking economy. Ordinary families rarely used coins for daily transactions. Bartering dominated most local economic exchange instead. Silver was weighed, not counted, for larger purchases. Hack silver, cut fragments of jewelry, functioned as currency. Traveling merchants brought goods from distant foreign lands. Silk, spices, and glass arrived from the Silk Road. Arab silver coins have been found across Scandinavia. This proves trade networks stretched incredibly far east. Amber, furs, and walrus ivory were major exports. Local blacksmiths were essential to every single village. They made tools, weapons, nails, and household items. Iron came from bog ore found in local wetlands. Smelting iron required intense heat and real skill. A skilled blacksmith held serious status in the community. Now, let's talk about travel and transportation methods. Most people never traveled far from their home village. Walking was the primary mode of daily transportation. Horses existed but were expensive to feed and keep. Only wealthier farmers could afford to own one. Boats were essential for coastal and river travel. Rivers and fjords connected otherwise isolated communities. Skis and sleds handled transportation across deep snow. Archaeologists found wooden skis dating back centuries. Reindeer sometimes pulled sleds in far northern regions. Let's discuss law and conflict resolution in villages. Disputes were settled at public assemblies called things. Free men could speak and vote on major decisions. Iceland's assembly, the Althing, started around 930 AD. It's considered one of the world's earliest parliaments. Serious crimes could result in outlawry, not prison. An outlaw lost all legal protection from the community. Anyone could kill an outlaw without facing punishment. This made banishment a genuinely terrifying, severe punishment. Blood feuds between families could last for generations. Compensation payments, called vergild, often prevented actual violence. This system valued different lives at different prices. Now, let's return to seasonal festivals and celebrations. Yule marked the winter solstice with major feasting. It later influenced modern Christmas traditions significantly. Sacrifices during Yule asked gods for spring's return. Families exchanged small gifts during these winter gatherings. Games and wrestling matches entertained the entire community. Tug-of-war-style contests tested strength and endurance. Skiing races were popular among younger villagers. Let's talk about the role of the elderly now. Elders held deep respect for accumulated practical knowledge. They taught skills like weather prediction and herbal medicine. Grandparents often cared for children during work hours. This freed parents for farming, fishing, and trading. Elderly Vikings who couldn't work still held value. Their stories preserved family history across many generations. Now, let's discuss what a wedding day actually looked like. Weddings typically happened after the harvest season ended. This timing ensured families could afford proper celebration. The bride wore a crown-like headpiece made of gold, or silver, depending on the family's actual wealth. A sword was often gifted from groom to bride. This symbolized protection and shared family responsibility. The feast afterward could last several full days. Guests brought food, drink, and small practical gifts. Now, let's talk about pregnancy and childbirth practices. Midwives assisted most births within the local community. Herbal knowledge helped manage pain during labor. Infant mortality rates were tragically high by modern standards. Nearly a third of children died before reaching adulthood. Naming ceremonies happened shortly after a successful birth. Names often honored deceased relatives or admired ancestors. Children were considered adults around 12 to 15. There was no extended childhood like we have today. Boys learned combat, farming, and trade skills early. Girls learned weaving, cooking, and household management early. Let's discuss something surprising: Viking hygiene standards. Excavated combs show Vikings groomed themselves regularly. English monks actually complained about Viking cleanliness habits. They said Vikings bathed weekly, unlike most Europeans. This made Vikings surprisingly attractive to local women. Tweezers and ear scoops were common personal items. Now let's talk about animals and their daily importance. Cows provided milk, meat, and valuable leather material. Sheep provided wool for nearly all clothing production. Pigs were slaughtered mainly for autumn feasts. Chickens provided eggs throughout most of the year. Dogs helped herd animals and guarded property at night. Horses were valuable, but expensive to feed properly. Losing livestock during winter could mean genuine disaster. Now, let's summarize the emotional reality of this life. Every single day demanded real, tangible, physical effort. But community bonds made survival genuinely possible together. Nobody survived Viking winters through isolation or independence. Family, neighbors, and tradition held entire communities together. This wasn't a life of constant violence or conquest. It was a life of labor, learning, and quiet resilience. Perhaps that's the real Viking legacy worth remembering.